Hi, welcome back to the channel. Michelle, and today joining me is my husband Jacob. And we're going to be talking about something that's being debated, I think, in the online homeschooling community. And that's, can you really be, or can you really call yourself a secular homeschooler if you're a person of faith? So I want to discuss that. I brought Jacob in here because I think we both bring pretty unique perspectives to it. So I was public schooled my entire life, and I did not grow up in a religious-based house at all. And Jacob was the opposite. He grew up in a religious-based house, and also his entire education was religious-based. He went to parochial schools. So I feel like we can give you kind of both ends of that, and I think the more voices and opinions and perspectives we can bring to this conversation, the better we'll understand it. So if you've watched my channel in the past, I definitely lean more towards secular homeschooler than a Christian homeschooler. And that's one of the things in the debate. Can you really call yourself secular if you have a faith background? So I made a whole video on why I prefer secular curriculum. I'll link it up above for you. But really, the main reasons are that I don't really identify with the Christian personification that's being put out there, especially online. When I'm looking at curriculum materials, and we both look at that, and Jacob does participate in our homeschool and help teach as well. But when I'm looking at materials, I really like to have things that are academically sound. I really like to have a more rigorous academics and then more gentle approach. And a lot of that you're not seeing in what is currently being put out in Christian curriculum, at least in the homeschool setting. A lot of it is very biased and very opinionated. And for me personally, I feel like a lot of it is trying to make everything else fit into this box. And it all comes down to this. It's not letting science be science. Science has to be this way in order for this to exist. And that's just not how we see it. And we talked about that in a previous video about how you don't have to get God in a box in order for it, like you don't have to prove anything. And that's just what a lot of Christian curriculum, in my opinion, is talking about. It's more about proving an agenda or a perspective than talking about different ideas. So that's one of the reasons I personally stay away from that type of curriculum. And I've talked to Jacob in the past because he had obviously a very different educational background than me. And I was like, do you see this types of thing? Do you see us as Christian homeschoolers? Because I honestly don't. All the resources we use are secular, and I don't even touch neutral-based curriculum because I feel like omitting information or skipping over information isn't a full education, which a lot of neutral curriculums do. And I think coming from a faith background, I am more easily able to see kind of the twisting or the manipulation of scripture. A lot of scripture is cherry-picked in these curriculums. And I think that's something that maybe someone who doesn't have a religious background wouldn't easily see. I know there's a lot of secular, like what they consider secular homeschoolers, to be completely fine using Christian-based resources. And it's not that it's Christian-based, it's how that Christianity is presented or the perspective it's giving. I don't necessarily agree with, so I'm not going to use it. But I think we can see more how that is being turned to give only a certain perspective. And that's just something I don't agree with. So I've always considered myself more of a secular homeschooler because I use secular resources in our homeschool. But it's really been brought up lately that, well, isn't your faith going to bleed into that area? Isn't, because a lot of people consider homeschooling a part of your life. And I don't know, I think because I was public schooled, I've always seen academics as separate than our everyday life. But I do think there is some truth to that our value system will bleed into what we're teaching. And I think the confusion here is that people assume Christian values are very narrow, very restricted, and really only putting Christianity on a pedestal. And that's honestly what I see a lot in at least the online community, what it's represented. And that's just not how I see us. If you've watched any of my videos before, I'm not what is being portrayed as a Christian out there. And I think that it's important to get different perspectives. And one of the reasons I'm so open about my faith is because I want people to realize there's different representations of Christians out there. There's hundreds of denominations. Just because you're a Christian doesn't like lump you all into you all agree on everything. And I think that needs to be talked about. And why I consider myself more secular in our homeschooling, because I don't identify with what I consider the aesthetic Christianity, which is out there right now, especially on YouTube and Instagram and all those social media things. It's the pretty, but not a lot of depth and not a lot of discussion about their actual faith or their faith practices or their belief systems. And I think that's disappointing. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to learn about each other and grow spiritually by listening to people who have different beliefs or perspectives than us. So that's really the main reason why I lean that way. But I think it is a good point, because I was talking with Jacob about this, about how our Christian values will obviously leak into other areas, especially in the areas we homeschool, but people assume those Christian values are the restricted ones. But really, I think you made a good point that it's, loving one another, not tolerating one another, but acceptance. And the way we view our faith is not excluding people. It's not Christianity is better than your belief system. This is our belief. We're very accepting of others. We're very loving, and that is what God and Jesus represent. And that leaks into things like, especially when we talk about social justice, that is very much a part of our value system. It's about caring for one another, for standing up for those who are ostracized or on the outskirts or treated differently for whatever reason. That is very much a part of who we are and part of our value system. So I'm not going to say it doesn't leak into it. I'm very proud that my faith is a part of that part of me that really cares for others and wants to advocate for those who don't have a voice. What are your thoughts with that?
Now that you've said all
yes,
that.
I'm sorry. I'm a talker. I'm used to just it being on me.
I think that if folks really want to have this conversation, we have to be speaking the same language, because there's a whole lot of words that we just assume all mean the same thing, and they don't. So when you say that you are or aren't a Christian homeschooler, what does it mean to be Christian in that sentence?
Yep.
Because that has become such a loaded word. Are you saying that you're a Christian because you're a Trinitarian or a Unitarian? Are you saying you're Christian because you are a foot-washing Baptist? Are you saying that what is labeling yourself as Christian mean? If your label aligns with some kind of Christian nationalist kind of rhetoric, then that's probably not the same kind of Christian that I would put my mind and heart towards.
I think you make a really good point there that a lot of homeschooling curriculum that is Christian-based is also very that Christian nationalism, things like history. I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, because it's glorifying a certain group of people. And I think people assume because we're Christian that we would support that we're going to support, doctrine of discovery, manifest destiny, all that. No, our faith tells us that that's wrong. And there's people during that time period who were religious that spoke against it. So this is the one side of Christianity that's often portrayed, especially online. It's very frustrating. But continue.
Yeah. So again, understanding the words that we're using, the terms that we're using, is going to be very important. The other piece that goes along with that too is if your definition of secular is only those things that are not in any way, shape, or form influenced or biased by some form of religion, you've got very little. And that goes through just about everything and everything. Even those subject matters that we don't necessarily want to think about of having some kind of religious implication to them do. It's very hard to think about or talk about anything with history without some connection to religious groups that were involved in things. For example, it's very hard to talk about the Crusades without talking about Christians doing things in places that they probably shouldn't have.
But the assumption is because we're Christians, we're not going to talk about the misuse of Christianity in those situations, which isn't true.
Yeah, so whitewashing history so it only shows the things that make you look good is not history. That's some kind of soothsaying or glorification or personification of something. That's not helpful. If we are going to be truly honest and open about, and I think this is an across the spectrum thing, no matter where you land, whether it's a political leaning or a faith-based leaning or something, if you're not acknowledging your own
bias,
well, not just bias, but frames of reference around some of these things, it makes it that much harder. If you are in a household where a faith is being practiced, even if you want to claim that you're a secular homeschooler, something from that faith system is going to end up spilling over in one shape or another. You may not overtly be saying these values or mores that we're imbuing in you come out of that, but in some way, shape, and form, they are influenced by that. And even if you want to play the super altruistic, ultra humanistic slant on things, fine, more power to you. There's going to be those moments where something that you'll claim as having been purely influenced by a person or thing at some point in history or some point in the development of whatever, it's going to have rubbed up against something else somewhere along the way.
So what you're saying is there's really nothing that's truly secular.
If we're defining secular as things that are purely devoid of any kind of religious bias or influence, then it's going to be awfully hard to find something that's truly secular. With that having been said, then I think that for those folks that want to attempt to be secular in their approach, have a harder road to travel than the folks that jump on the rubber stamped Christian end of things, or whatever other faith tradition you wanna throw in there. And the reason being is you have to think, and if you just pick something up because it has a label on it that you think you identify with, and don't take those extra steps to go through and see whether or not it really is reflective of what you do feel is where you connect with stuff, you're going to be doing yourself a disservice. You're going to be doing the children, if you're homeschooling, a disservice by not really wrestling with that stuff ahead of time.
That's one of the things I struggle with, because I feel like in the homeschooling community in general, it's hard to find people who are looking at like the credentials and the experience of the people writing these curriculum. And I think it's even worse in the Christian sphere of things, because you're not looking at the people who are writing this. You know, do they even have degrees in theology? Do they have any background? Or is it just somebody off a blog saying something and it matters?
It's more than that, though, because you can pick up a curriculum or order a curriculum that's by somebody that looks like they've got all the right letters after their name in terms of degrees and things like that. But if all of their credentials come from a diploma mill,
Yeah.
or if it's uh, really hyper parochial in their background.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is all of their education or formative development is in one particular branch. It's gonna have
That's gonna seep through quicker.
a bias to it. It's gonna have some other kind of implications to it. And I know at some point, as I'm saying this, someone somewhere is going to go back to your introduction
Yep.
where you said that I did do the parochial school thing, and it's true. I was in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod school system from preschool through 12th grade. Um, I was also going through that school system in the 80s and 90s where there was a big shift from what felt like fairly middle of the road to more staunch conservatism leaning things. So science in particular, um, we talked about Darwin, we talked about evolution, we talked about dinosaurs in middle school, grade school, high school. It wasn't until I was about a junior in high school that there seemed to be this shift away from some of those things. There was one teacher I had in particular in high school who taught a course on it was Foundations of Natural Science or something like that, and they tore pages out of a textbook, and when you even if you've grown up totally devoid of some concept, if you see a teacher removing pages from a textbook, there has to be a little part of you that's wondering, what the hell is going on here? And if there's not, you need to do some soul searching about that, because if there's information that you are being told you don't get to have access to, um, there's a reason for that.
Yeah, that's a red flag.
I think that some of that spills into some of the other debates and conversations that are pretty relevant right now around whether or not public libraries should have books available, or whether or not schools should be allowing kids to have access to certain things, or whether or not a teacher should be fired for showing students a piece of art. Some of those things I think culturally are pretty relevant right now. But getting back to what we were originally talking about, so yes, I grew up in a fairly parochial environment where there was a kind of single thread with many different things. Now that was education as a child. Home life. My mom was a preschool teacher, a private institution that she was teaching at, but it wasn't religiously affiliated. And then with my dad, he taught in the Catholic school system for a number of years, and then in the late 80s, early 90s, made the switch to the public school system. And his whole mindset was always on the trying to ensure that his students had as well-rounded an opportunity in education as possible, and that's built into the home life. So yeah, there was in my schooling, my personal schooling, the kind of narrow focus parochialism, but within my household that wasn't the case. There was a lot of even-handedness and a lot of opportunity to be exposed to a number of different opportunities. And even though I attended a private Lutheran college, my major was in world religious studies, so I had a wider perspective than just the narrow focus within a particular tradition of a larger religion. So that's I think important too. So getting back to the comment that I made about hyperparochialism. So hyperparochialism is person X, their only exposure, only worldview, only teaching or engagement is always within their own little sphere. So if a person decides that they want to go the homeschool route and they're looking at curriculum and they see a person that has all these letters behind their name, they assume, oh, well, this person's well learned, but everything about them is all steeped within the same tradition, same very insular group, then that, in my mind, becomes highly suspect as to whether or not this person has truly taken the time to have a diversified background as to what they're presenting. You know, the whole thing about neutral curriculum that you brought up, where it seems like folks try to avoid hot button topics. You know, that's almost as equally difficult and dangerous, in that if something is controversial because a particular insular group doesn't like talking about it, so now the neutral group is going to avoid talking about it because they don't want to offend somebody, that's a problem. If you don't want to talk about the creation of our solar system because you're afraid that you're going to offend some young Earth, flat Earth creationist person, then you're doing a disservice. Now, I know that there are those folks that are very adamantly stuck on the biblical 7 days of creation thing and have gotten somebody from, who knows, Bob Jones University to tell them that it was exactly so many years.
That's a big one in the homeschooling community.
But again, you know, if that's where a person's faith is leading them, that's great. However, the person who decides to try to educate their children, if they decide that they're going to pick something up, they need to be aware of what they're picking up and what they're going to end up inadvertently spoon feeding to their children. And if you're going through a curriculum and you start seeing certain things that you start to question yourself, or not even question yourself, you then decide, well, it says this, so that must be true for what I believe. Pump the brakes a little bit for a moment there, because just because you see something in print somewhere that somebody published doesn't necessarily mean that that's true for you.
Yes.
You know, there's an importance in doing some real deep soul searching around what you believe, and then also having a support network in some kind of faith community, so that you don't fall down some kind of rabbit hole of almost cult-like, well, this person that I've now ascribed some kind of authority to told me that this is the case, so I'm going to believe it. That's dangerous for you. It's dangerous for anyone else that gets exposed to that as well. So
I think you just described all of social media right there, and influencers.
Oh, I mean, yeah. I don't think we've got enough.
Yeah, we don't. But it was a good correlation you made there, that people take another person's word and think, oh, they know what they're talking about, I trust them, I'm going to use this, without really diving into. I don't think the majority of people even look at the company that's putting these things out, the values of that company, their faith statements. All the Christian curriculum I have looked at, I go to the company, I look at their faith statement, I figure out where they're coming from before I even touch that curriculum and look at it. And most of them will up front tell you exactly what they are. You just have to look.
Well, and some don't though. Some do some pretty
Sneaky stuff.
snake oily salesman wordsmithing to try to make you feel comfortable with something that's really kind of shady.
Hmm.
A really good example of some of this is um, there's this ad series that's been going on for a while now that always has the he gets us, and it'll start talking about this person had to endure suffering and persecution and grew up in a migrant family and all this stuff, and it's supposed to be about Jesus, and you're like, oh well, that's cool. That seems like a pretty progressive statement, and I want to be on board with this. But then when you do the kind of deeper digging on some of that stuff, you start to realize that the group that's putting that stuff out is the same group that's behind the ultra right wing conservative Christian group stuff with Hobby Lobby and some of those organizations, and it's like, well, now you just created an ad buy
Hmm.
that lures a person
Yep.
into thinking that well, God loves me for who I am, but you really don't believe what you're selling,
Yep.
and that's manipulation. Uh,
There's a
so
lot of
so
that.
so that's something to be mindful of. Um, Now, at the same time, if you come across something, you're like, wow, this really seems to resonate with me.
Hmm.
I feel really good about this, and you do your digging, and things seem to check out, and all that. Well, that's great. Good for you. You found something that fits with you. Um, that then doesn't necessarily give you permission to push that onto somebody else either.
Well, I feel like that's kind of where the disconnect, especially in the homeschooling community, is. We view our child's education separate from ourselves, that it's a right that children all have an education. And I think sometimes parents are more focused on themselves in that education and what they want to push onto their kids, that their kids are almost like property or extensions of them, and that it's their right as their
Yeah.
parent to do that. And I honestly
So
disagree completely with that.
yeah, there's a lot there. So children as property thing, that's a pretty significant issue just kind of across the board
Yep.
in North America, but predominantly in the United States. If you really want to look into this, check out your local state and even federal laws around anything having to do with kids. They're pretty similar to anything having to do with physical property. This glass here probably has about the same amount of rights as a 7-year-old, although in some states you
Right?
you probably won't go into jail if this ends up in the garbage can. Um,
Well, I think that's a good point. A lot of countries outlaw, it's against the law to homeschool because they know there's situations where homeschooling is not beneficial to the child, where it's harmful, there's abusive situations. I'm not saying that exists in all homeschooling situations, but it's easy for those situations to arise in that environment. I think we work on this mentality that everybody wants what's best for their child, and sadly, that's just not the truth. Sometimes a parent wants only what they want and don't even see that child in front of them. So this is the debate we're at, and I think you make a good point that there's no black and white of this. There's no
yeah.
secular versus Christian homeschooler. That we are Christians and we homeschool, and that's the most we kind of identify with, I guess.
Well, and if you're going into the homeschool realm of things purely because you don't want your child to be exposed at something in a public school, or you think the private school your child is going to is not insular enough, you're probably going to be doing some kind of disservice to your kid in some way, shape, or form.
Which is ironic, because what do you do when you homeschool? You homeschool and you find all the other homeschoolers like you, and you're doing the exact same thing that you don't want in the public school. You're only the irony.
Yeah. So if you're hoping that we're going to have an easy black and white answer to this, the answer is, of course, no. And I think it's important that no matter how you're wrestling with this, you recognize that there's a lot of gray area, because in our situation, because of the location we're in, because of the opportunities that are not available for our children, we ended up homeschooling. For one of our kids in particular, it's not necessarily about content. It's about whether or not they'd be able to get through a school day without being sick all the time.
Our youngest daughter has celiac disease.
So that's significant enough for us to make those changes. When we were dealing with pandemic time stuff, the switch to remote e-learning was not a good for the mental well-being of our oldest daughter. So being able to homeschool and being able to link up with other homeschoolers, that was a boost for their social emotional well-being that they weren't able to get in the remote learning way. And certainly there are folks that it's the opposite, that going from a classroom with lots of kids to remote learning gives them the opportunity to hone in and focus better. That's great. The individualization of what works best for your child/student, I think, is where the energy needs to go.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point about that. It's not about us, it's about what's best for that child.
Right. And it's important that we don't confuse what's best for our child or student with what biases we have that we want our children to have too. And I think that's particularly important when we're talking about any kind of faith-based homeschooling. If you're just doing it because you want to instill some kind of religious bias or worldview on your child that you don't want to give the impression they can make their own choice around, then that's potentially abusive. And I don't even think potential is a strong enough word. I'll just take it away. That is abusive. If you've structured yourself in a way so that your child, your student, is isolated from opportunity to interact with folks of any other different kind of background, and then you double down on that and saying that this is how it has to be, in my mind, that's some kind of abuse. And I'm sure that there are some folks that are going to take offense to that. And, how can you call yourself a Christian if you'd not let your kid be forced to believe about Jesus? I think that how I believe my God is big enough to still work in ways through the Holy Spirit that would not be hampered by my involvement. Now, if I were to be overtly forceful about what I think my child should or shouldn't believe, I'm almost guaranteeing that my child will want absolutely nothing to do with me when they get older, let alone the God I claim to believe in. So that I think is kind of important in some of that stuff too. But that might be a tangent.
So I feel like, this was a really good conversation to have around it, that it's not an easy secular versus Christian homeschooler. And after having these conversations, especially with Jacob, I realized that I really can't identify with either at this point, that I don't fit the description of this or that, because there is no this or that. There's a whole lot in between, and we're somewhere in between. And I want to talk about it, and I want to show what my homeschool is like, because I feel like there's a lot of us that fall in that in between, that we're not in this one or just that one, that we're in there somewhere. And it's okay that you don't fit in a specific box. We're not meant to fit in a specific box.
Right. And I think that platforms like YouTube and others probably exaggerate the race to one extreme or the other.
Definitely.
And that's just not.
We're not going to get anywhere with that.
I think that being genuine is far more important.
Yep.
But that's just me, you know. If you want to pretend your way to something else, more power to you. But I don't think it's going to end up well in the end.
But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. If you've watched my channel for a long time, where do you think I fit in this stream of stuff? Because of course we have our ideas and our thoughts on what we do in our homeschool, but I'm always curious how people perceive our homeschool as well. Because again, we don't fit into any of the typical boxes you see, or especially on social media, what you're seeing portrayed. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If not, thank you for watching.